Have you ever met someone who makes you feel both close and distant at the same time? That's exactly the feeling you'll get when you follow the story of me and my stepsister, Madison. One quiet evening, when everything seemed to be asleep, she walked into my room uninvited, her sharp gaze and loaded questions changing everything. Our conversations had always been cold, but tonight something shifted. Madison started tapping into emotions I had never dared to face. From that moment, everything went sideways. Will you dare to explore and confront this undeniable truth? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you are watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The quiet hum of the night filled the room as I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on my work. The house was unusually still. The muffled sounds of the television in the living room now faded, signaling that everyone had retired for the night. My stepsister, Madison, had her room next to mine, but we barely interacted beyond the polite exchanges expected of us. I convinced myself it was better that way, less complicated. My father had remarried a year ago, bringing Madison and her mother into our lives. At first glance, Madison seemed aloof, confident in a way that felt almost unnerving. She was nothing like the sisters I'd imagined growing up, if I ever imagined having one at all. There was something about her presence, though, that always left me uneasy, as if I was being scrutinized in ways I couldn't quite explain. Tonight, I had been trying to distract myself from that uneasiness. Headphones in and eyes glued to the glowing screen of my laptop, but the faint sound of my door creaking pulled me out of my focus. Still awake, her voice broke the silence, soft yet carrying an edge of something unspoken. I turned, and there she was, leaning casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. Her loose t-shirt and shorts looked far too casual for the intensity her gaze carried. "Yeah, couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Please comment number 1 so that I can know that you liked the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a great inspiration and encouragement for us. Thank you very much." She stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation. Shutting the door softly behind her, I tensed but didn't say anything. "Mom's snoring like a chainsaw again," she said, half smirking as she moved toward my bed and sat on the edge. "Figured I'd hang out here for a bit, unless you're busy." Her eyes flicked to my laptop screen, then back to me. I shrugged. "Not really." The air between us felt charged, though I couldn't pinpoint why. She picked up a book from my nightstand, flipping through it absent-mindedly. I could feel her watching me, even when I wasn't looking directly at her. "You're always in here," she said suddenly, her tone curious. "Don't you get bored?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I like my space," Madison tilted her head, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Or maybe you're just avoiding us." Her words hit a little too close to home, but I forced a chuckle. "Isn't that what you're doing right now?" She laughed softly, setting the book down. Fair point. There was a pause, the kind that felt deliberate. She leaned back slightly, propping herself up on her hands. "You don't have to be so stiff around me, you know," she said after a moment. "I'm not stiff," I shot back, though my voice betrayed the defensive edge I hadn't meant to show. "Right," she said, drawing the word out as if testing my patience. "You're totally relaxed." I turned my chair slightly to face her, folding my arms. "What do you want, Madison?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment she looked almost serious. "Nothing, just trying to figure you out, I guess." "Figure me out?" "You're hard to read," she said, her gaze holding mine. "Everyone else in this house wears their emotions on their sleeves. You keep everything locked up." I didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't wrong, but it felt strange hearing it from her. Madison stood, pacing slowly toward the window. "Do you ever feel like you don't fit in here?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I admitted reluctantly. "Me too," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's like we're both just extras in someone else's story." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she was trying to connect with me or if she was just toying with me. She turned back to face me, her expression unreadable. "Anyway, I should probably let you get back to whatever you were doing." Before I could respond, she walked toward the door, her movements slow and deliberate. Just as she reached it, she paused, her hand resting on the doorknob. "Good night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good night," I replied, my own voice equally quiet. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone once again. But the silence she left behind felt louder than before. I couldn't get the earlier interaction out of my head. Madison had left the room, but her presence lingered in a way I couldn't shake. It was as though her words had dug into something buried inside me, something I wasn't ready to face. I tried returning to my work, but my focus was shattered. Please pause for 2 seconds. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is a great inspiration and encouragement for us. Thank you very much. Every thought was interrupted by the memory of her leaning against the door, her gaze holding mine just a little too long. A soft knock pulled me from my spiral, and before I could respond, the door opened again. She stepped inside, a bottle of water in her hand this time, and gave me a half smile. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said casually, though her tone suggested she already knew she wasn't. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "You're persistent tonight," Madison laughed, closing the door behind her. "What can I say? It's boring out there." She crossed the room and perched on the edge of my desk, looking down at me. "Besides, you're way more interesting than Dad or my mom." "I doubt that," I muttered, trying to downplay the growing tension in the room. She tilted her head, studying me like she was trying to piece together a puzzle. "You don't see it, do you?" "See what?" "That you're different." In a good way, her words caught me off guard. I wasn't used to this kind of attention from her, or anyone for that matter. "You're reading too much into it," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Madison shrugged, her gaze lingering on mine. "Maybe, or maybe you're just scared to admit that you like having me around." I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. There was no playfulness in her voice now, only quiet confidence. It was unnerving, the way she could so easily disarm me. "I don't mind it," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. Her smile widened, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The silence between us felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping just enough to make my pulse quicken. "You know, I don't really buy this whole 'I like my space' act you put on," she said. "I think you're just afraid of letting people in." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "What are you trying to say, Madison?" Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought she might back off. But then she shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "Nothing, forget it," she stood, taking a step toward the window and looking out into the dark night. "You make everything so complicated," she said, almost to herself. I stayed silent, unsure of what to say. The air in the room felt thick, like we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't name. Finally, she turned back to me, her expression softer than before. "You know, you don't always have to have your guard up. It's okay to just be yourself." The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. Madison wasn't one to show weakness, but in that moment, she seemed almost fragile. "I don't know how to do that," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her gaze softened even further, and she took a step closer to me. "Maybe I can help," I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "You're not exactly the expert on boundaries, Madison." She smirked, but there was no malice in it. "Maybe not, but at least I'm honest about what I want." Her words hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten. She wasn't playing around anymore. This was something else entirely. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "You don't even know what you're doing," I said, trying to break the tension. "Maybe not," she admitted, "but neither do you." The honesty in her voice was disarming, and for a moment I couldn't look away. There was something about the way she was looking at me, something that made it impossible to deny what we both knew but wouldn't say. She took another step closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. "Why are you so afraid of me?" "I'm not," I said quickly, though my voice lacked conviction. Madison tilted her head, her smile faint but knowing. "Liar," the word cut through me, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I was lying to myself as much as I was lying to her, and she could see right through it. Before I could respond, she reached out and touched my arm, just lightly, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. "You don't have to be," she said softly. Her touch lingered for a moment before she pulled back, leaving me frozen in place. She took a step toward the door, her movements slow and deliberate. "Good night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone with the weight of everything unsaid. The silence in the room was unbearable after she left, but it didn't last long. I was still sitting there, my thoughts running in circles, when the door opened again. Madison stepped in without knocking this time, her movements confident but not hurried. "I can't sleep," she said simply, as though that explained everything. I stared at her, unsure of what to say. My chest felt tight and my mind raced with all the reasons why this needed to stop, why she shouldn't be here, and why I shouldn't want her to stay. But none of them made it past my lips. She crossed the room slowly, her eyes locked on mine. "You're not going to kick me out, are you?" I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. "Good," she said, her tone soft but firm. She moved closer, leaning against the desk again. Her posture relaxed but her gaze intense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I didn't know how to handle. "Why do you always look at me like that?" she asked suddenly. "Like what? Like you're scared of what might happen if you get too close." Her words hit harder than I expected, and I looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "You're imagining things, am I?" she pressed, her voice quiet but relentless. I didn't answer, couldn't. She was too close now, her presence overwhelming. I could feel the heat radiating off her skin, see the faint rise mounds and fall of her chest as she breathed. "You know, you can pretend all you want," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we both know the truth." "Madison, this is wrong," she interrupted, finishing the sentence I couldn't bring myself to say. She stepped closer, her hand brushing against mine. "Maybe, but does that really change anything?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "It changes everything." She tilted her head, her eyes searching mine. "Does it? Or are you just afraid of what it means?" Her hand lingered on mine, her touch light but deliberate. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to say something, anything. That would put an end to this, but I couldn't move. "This isn't a game," I said finally, my voice shaking. "I know," she said softly. "Do you think I don't know that?" There was something in her voice that stopped me in my tracks, an honesty, a vulnerability that I hadn't expected. She wasn't teasing me anymore, wasn't playing some game to get under my skin. This was real and it terrified me. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Neither do I," she said, her voice barely audible. "But that doesn't mean we have to keep pretending." Her hand moved from mine to my arm, her touch sending a shiver down my spine. She was so close now that I could feel her breath on my skin, and I knew there was no turning back. "This is insane," I said, though my voice lacked any conviction. "Maybe," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "But doesn't it feel right?" I didn't answer, couldn't. My thoughts were a tangled mess, and the only thing I could focus on was her. The way she looked at me, the way she made everything else fade away. And then without thinking, without deciding, I leaned in. It wasn't planned, wasn't something I meant to do. It just happened. The moment our lips met, it was like the world stopped. Every doubt, every fear, every reason why this was wrong disappeared, replaced by something I couldn't describe, something overwhelming and all-consuming. For a brief moment, it felt perfect, but then reality crashed back in and I pulled away, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then why does it feel like the only thing that's ever made sense?" she countered, her gaze steady and unflinching. I didn't have an answer for her. All I knew was that the line we'd crossed could never be uncrossed, and as much as I wanted to deny it, part of me didn't want to go back. She stepped back slightly, giving me space but not breaking the connection between us. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said softly, "but don't lie to yourself about what you want." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving me alone with the weight of what had just happened. The silence that followed was deafening, but I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed felt surreal, like I was living in a dream I couldn't wake up from. Everything in the house seemed the same on the surface. Our parents laughed at the dinner table. The usual routines played out, but beneath it all, there was a tension I couldn't ignore. Madison and I barely spoke in front of anyone else, but when our eyes met, it was as if the entire world stopped for a moment. Every interaction became a game of restraint, every glance a silent conversation we couldn't afford to have aloud. She acted as though nothing had changed, laughing with her friends over the phone or chatting casually with her mom. But when we were alone in the same room, her demeanor shifted. She didn't need to say anything. The way she looked at me said more than words ever could. One afternoon, while the house was quiet, she found me in the kitchen. I was making a sandwich, trying to distract myself with something mundane. She walked in like it was the most natural thing in the world, her movements calm and deliberate. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but loaded with meaning. I kept my focus on the counter, avoiding her gaze. "Hey," she stepped closer, her presence filling the space in a way that made it impossible to ignore her. "Are we just going to keep pretending nothing happened?" I froze for a moment before turning to face her. "What else can we do, Madison? You know we can't." "Why not?" she interrupted, her voice firm but not loud. "Who's going to know if we're careful?" I stared at her, my chest tightening. "This isn't just about getting caught. This is wrong. You know that." She folded her arms, leaning against the counter. "Maybe it is, but does that change how you feel?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I opened my mouth to respond but found I didn't have an answer. She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine. "You can keep running from this, but it's not going to go away," she said softly. "You know it, and I know it." I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. "You don't understand. This will ruin everything if it gets out." "Then it doesn't get out," she said simply, as if it were that easy. "We're the only ones who need to know. No one else matters." Her words made sense in a twisted way, but I couldn't shake the feeling of impending disaster. "Madison, this isn't a game. It's not just about us. What if?" "Stop," she said, cutting me off. "What if? What if? You can't live your life being scared of what might happen. Do you want this or not?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to say no, to end this before it went any further. But the truth was staring me in the face. I couldn't deny it anymore, no matter how much I wanted to. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped even closer, so close that I could feel her warmth. "Yes, you do. You just don't want to admit it." Her confidence was unnerving, but there was something disarming about her honesty. She wasn't pretending to be anything other than what she was, and it made me feel more exposed than I ever had before. "Madison," I started, but she shook her head, cutting me off again. "No more excuses," she said, her voice soft but firm. "If you don't want this, tell me and I'll walk away. But if you do, stop fighting it." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension between us was unbearable, and I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, teetering between jumping and stepping back. Finally, I let out a shaky breath. "This is a mistake." "Maybe," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. "But it's our mistake to make." I didn't respond, couldn't respond. The sound of the front door opening in the distance snapped us both out of the moment, and she stepped back, her expression unreadable. "This isn't over," she said quietly before turning and walking away, leaving me alone with the weight of her words. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her voice echoed in my mind. I wanted to believe I could stop this, that I could push her away and go back to how things were before, but deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't something I could control. It wasn't something either of us could control. It was a fire that had already started, and no matter how much I tried to smother it, it would keep burning. As the house grew quiet again, I realized the worst part wasn't the risk or the guilt. It was knowing that, despite everything, I didn't want it to stop. The story we've just explored is truly an emotional and conflicting journey. It doesn't just revolve around the confusion and tension between two people. It's a lesson about the feelings we sometimes refuse to face. Life often places us in situations we can't predict and forces us to make decisions that may change our lives forever. The story of the narrator and Madison makes us reflect on the blurred lines between right and wrong, relationships that can't be clearly defined, and the unease in accepting what we truly feel. The emotions we experience in this story aren't just curiosity or confusion. They're deep, introspective questions about ourselves and the relationships we have. Have you ever asked yourself, have I truly confronted my own feelings? This story challenges us to answer that question, and maybe you'll find a piece of yourself in the uncomfortable and complex situations the characters face. When looking back, you might realize that the events in life are sometimes not random. Every moment we go through, every conversation, whether short or long, could open a new door for discovering things about ourselves that we never thought about before. And perhaps, in these discoveries, we'll find a corner of our soul that we've never looked at before. That feeling could be confusion, anxiety, or even fear, but the important thing is that we must face it. If we don't, we'll forever live in avoidance and never truly grow. This story isn't just a journey of the characters, it's a journey of us all. We start with small questions, silent thoughts, but as we delve deeper into the story, we realize that these are bigger questions about ourselves, how we face the world, and the relationships around us. Do we dare to face the truth, even though it may hurt? Can we accept the parts of ourselves that we've been trying to ignore? This story not only invites you to explore the emotions of the characters, but also challenges you to explore your own. If this story has touched your heart and you want to continue exploring intriguing content, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't miss out on future videos filled with thought-provoking stories and discussions. Subscribe now so you never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.